All right. Hello, everybody. I'm thankful for you being here. My name is Dr. James Hawkins, and I am a therapist. And I am a black man, obviously, as you can see. But it's not just about me being black. It's I'm a person, a human being who cares about society. And there is a lot going on in our society, and I can see that we're hurting. We're all looking for answers, and we're all trying to make sense of this moment. And it sucks and it hurts. Um, and so, I've been spending a lot of time talking to people about racial reconciliation and how we get stuck and we can't even have really vulnerable conversations to be able to have success in our vulnerability around the issue of race. And that just sucks because then if we can't even connect in the conversation, then we can't move forward in unified action to do anything about it. And then it just leaves us all stuck in frustration and just hurt and pain. And that sucks. But in this special segment, there's been a part of this where I wanted to talk to people I knew that had interactions with particularly law enforcement, but also our military personnel, just to understand the emotional dynamic of that. So if you're watching right now and you're serving in law enforcement or some type of first responder, I want you to know that what's in my heart and my motive behind this is I want to meet you in this place where society probably is you're getting all these messages where you probably put on the uniform and the badge every day, knowing that you might not be able to come home, but you do it because you love the people in your community, you love the people that you serve with, and you want to do better. And it sucks for you when things like this happen. And there are people that maybe for one reason or another, they're impaired. Maybe they do have racial bias that they bring into the job, and then they make a bad call because either they're impaired or this bias gets in the way. And then now, what do you do with it? And now I don't even know what you do with all of those emotions. And how does that affect you when you get ready to go to work the next day, the next week, the next month, the next year? And there's so much pressure on you. Maybe you're a supervisor in law enforcement. We're trying to come alongside you too because you want answers. And I don't know how people are coming alongside you to help you have more success in preparing your fellow officers and first responders for these kind of ideas. So I have two friends here that I know have a heart for this community. They have the experience of what it really takes to help people in hard places, and being able to where you're trained so many times to turn off your emotions. They also know how to help that there's a time when you do have to turn off your emotions to get it done. And that makes complete sense. But there's also times in the midst of your job, you need to be in touch with your emotions to be able to do it successfully. So I just wanted to bring these two friends into this to make space for that. And so a little bit about me also to bring into that vulnerability. I served in the military. I've been in Iraq. And I've had to pull my weapon on someone just because they fit a profile. And my fear came up. They fit a profile, and I pulled my weapon. Thankfully, there was somebody else around to help catch the moment, and that person's life was spared. So I know, even just from that one interaction, and I can't even imagine how many times you have to make those decisions. Even in that one interaction, it happened without me having to even consciously think. I just saw a particular profile and my body felt fear and I went into protective mode. Not only for me, but part of my protection were my other comrades were defenseless at this moment. And so I went into protection, but thankfully someone else was able to catch the moment. Or who knows what would have happened from there. And so that's the vulnerability, and that's some of the heart I bring into this conversation. But also, I am a black man, and so I understand the fears and the concerns of that community, and they're just wanting to know, what's going through the heart and minds of our officers as they police us. Are they triggered by just my black body or the size, the stature of my body? Am I just a walking target for their fears? So I get that part too. And I think for many of you, that's not the truth. And there are many other factors that go into play with it. So that's the vulnerability in the space I want to enter into this with you all. So first, I want to introduce Dr. Ryan Reyna. Just Ryan, could you just kind of share a little bit about your experience, maybe that you bring to the table for this, and just your hopes here?
Yeah, it's good to be with you, man. I hadn't heard that story before. I didn't know about your experience in the military where you pulled your weapon. That's news. That's news to me. And man, I think there's so much in that story that we got to learn from. That's kind of the bullseye of what we're talking about today. So I appreciate you sharing that. So yeah, I'm also a mental health therapist. I'm a trainer in the model that I practice. I've also been a leader in multiple organizations. I'm still learning a lot about equality and about bias and systemic racism and these topics. I think I learn some all the time. I came from a fairly diverse racial background. I've had unique experiences that have taught me different things, but overall, I'm still learning. Really, though, the piece that I like to try to contribute to this discussion is I study the process of change.
Mm.
I know a lot of people are tired of the talking, and tired of the constant sort of repetition that goes on both sides or back and forth. And people get fatigue of just continuing to say the same things and not seeing change. And it's heartbreaking for me because as someone who studies the process of change, I realize that what we're doing can never work. This is not going to happen. And so then, like you and I talk about, James, my fear is not so much for you and me, but our grandchildren. If our culture continues to de-evolve and have these more of the same fights, does this put each other at odds when we shouldn't be? I want to have an equal place, and I want us to have unity and more love in the world. And I know that sounds cliche, but I want to find a way that's going to work and not just continue to be more of the same. That's why I'm here.
Ryan, I love when you said that. And I think that's the cycle we're trying to change. I couldn't put my finger until you said that, is if we continue in this same cycle, we do not want it to put each other at odds, where it's the public against the police, or the police against the public, or the police or the black community against the police and the police. That's not what we want to do. And I don't think that that's the heart of anyone. That's going to be careful. That's not the heart of many. And so that's what we're trying to reach out to, is the same people who feel stuck in that same cycle, and it's maddening for them as well. It's a good way to put it. And so I also have my friend here, George Fowler. And George definitely has some experience and expertise to bring into this. And so, George, thank you for being here. Just kind of share some more about your past experience that you bring to this and your hopes here.
Thanks for having me, James. I am also a therapist, like the two of you. I'm the president of New York Center for Emotionally Focused Therapists. But before that, I was over 3 years a New York City police officer and over 18 years a New York City firefighter, served during 9/11. And I guess what I want to, when I watched that video of George Floyd calling out for his mother, I mean, my goodness. I think that cuts across, everybody on the planet saw that, and it kind of just tapped into our humanity. And my big question is, like, what happened? What blocked those cops' hearts from being impacted? Anybody who watches that is impacted. And yet something happened to these four men that stopped that natural process, right? And it got me thinking that, I know how much training I got in the fire department. I do a lot of work with the military, special forces, how much training I get to turn off my feelings, and how adaptive and necessary. We wouldn't be here as a species, right, if we didn't learn how to do that. And we don't want, police officers, firefighters to lose that ability. And yet we invest so much in that, turning it off, and we get no training in turning our feelings back on. And we wonder why tour after tour, year after year, the cumulative effect of chronically turning off these feelings and what that does to a human nervous system, right? And it can get to the point of something like and this isn't making any excuses, but a lot of times we know muscle memory, people no longer have a choice. Like, their training takes over, and before you know it, they're so used to tuning people out. I mean, it crushes me to hear people saying, he's dying, do something. And they're like, their ears are literally turned off. Yep. So, this conversation is about, like, how do we help police officers and first responders, like, turn their feelings back on? This is about flexibility. And right now we're not seeing that flexibility, right? It's this all or nothing scenario.
Man, if that catches so much, like, it just, like, you saw it. And I think that's the part that really gripped the nation. It's like everybody, it hit all of our nervous system. And it's like, as you watch it, everyone's pleading, like, we know how it's going to go, but we're like, he's going to get up. He's got to feel like his body's not moving. He's got to, and it's like, no one. And so I don't know. And I think part of it is, like, I hope that they do an investigation in the sense of, man, what was going through your heart? Yeah. What was going through your head, man? We got to learn from this, because we can't just keep letting these things, just let the media kind of just take over, and he could get prosecuted. But what if we don't learn from it, and we can't find that next pattern that leads to something else like this, and we just keep repeating the same cycle over and over again? Yeah.
In our trainings, we show a 2-minute clip from some research that was done at Harvard called the still face experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a powerful, look at what happens in relationships. And that's what those other cops were doing. And that's in that video. People were crying out to save this guy, and they were just emotionless, completely unresponsive to that situation. So that's the right question. Where were they? Where was their attention?
That's right.
And how do we find a way? Because that's got to be different.
That's right. And even as we
to
talk
me, that's
about,
this.
go ahead.
No, that's the whole secret. We throw words around like systemic racism, right? That captures a process that doesn't change after decades, right? So there's truth to this process. And yet most people find it hard to embrace that message because they know in their heart that's not what they're trying to do. But we're starting to recognize is the choice has been taken away from a lot of these individuals. They've gotten so used to doing things that they no longer think about what they're doing, and their body just goes into this kind of action. And we have to start developing a pause button, moments of reflection, of checking in, that's saying, hey, where are you at emotionally? And that's not going to happen unless we provide the training that says this turning on emotion is as important of turning off your emotion. This is about flexibility. People have more range. They have more vitality when they have more options. This is about expand. This is a win-win conversation for everybody, to get more of this training. And yet so often these traditional, macho professions are threatened by even the word emotion. So that's really what we're trying to change. And what is an emotion? It's just your body saying something's happening. Pay attention. It's giving you information. It's really logical to listen to that information.
And I think a lot of people hear that word. I was going to say, just kind of going along with what you're saying, a lot of people hear that word emotion and they think it's all sit around and feel sorry for yourself and kind of cry. Oh, that would be a bad thing altogether. We're talking about something much bigger than that. Anger is as much of an important emotion as any other, and looking at the whole range, and to be effective in those difficult situations, we got to have people who are fully human. And when your humanness has been beaten out of you or trained out of you, or life has been too hard, then for any of us, we're dangerous in those scenarios. And so I think that's our burden that we want to talk about today, is how do we help people find a different way of going about that.
Then that's what I was going to hit right there, Ryan, because George, you talked about emotion. It's a signal from the body. And then Ryan, when you came right in, I was going to say, what does the function of emotion serve, particularly to police officers, first responders? What happens when a police officer blocks that element of who they are, and how does that create a situation where that compromises their ability to perform their duty? Does that make sense there? And if you want to reword that question, reload it. But
you're trying to override a fight or flight response, right? When there's a threat and your body is mobilizing to run away or run towards, your frontal cortex turns offline, right? Mm-hmm. What most people don't realize is that you can create a challenge response. You can train people how to actually have a sense of calmness where you can think clearly during times of stress, right? As a firefighter, I wasn't born running towards a building that's on fire, but I learned, my training learned me to suppress the fearful response, right? So I can focus on tasks and think more clearly. And that's really important in this process of being able to perform your job, right? But my nervous system was never designed to be in that challenge response 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right? Mm-hmm. So I got to get that help when my tour is over or the immediacy of that moment's over to kind of get back in touch with my emotional reality. So it's about flexibility. It makes me think, certainly these events bring up all our own histories. So you were sharing, mm-hmm. James, I was 22 years old getting sent to a minority area where I was a white cop, and all the people I was serving were not white, right? And I was taught, the best way you could help is you get guns off the street. I mean, that's how you're saving people's lives. And the people around me trained me to pull up on a corner and throw people up against a wall and search them for guns. And every once in a while you'd get one, but 1 out of 100 What about those 99 other people? I had no empathy for that. I can't imagine what that was like. I never experienced that. I thought I was doing a good job. I'd come back afterwards and the other cops would say, great job. I mean, I totally missed the emotional impact of what it must be like to be a 15-year-old just hanging out with your friends, and all of a sudden you're thrown up against a wall and you're being searched. You're already being assumed that who you are is bad and doing something wrong. I mean, that's horrific. And yet it wasn't even on my radar screen. Right. So I never got any training to empathize on what it was like for that 15-year-old boy that I threw up against the wall.
I think
and
that's
it starts with you just trying to do your job, you know, and that's what you're focused on. But, you know, when that's dangerous for you too, because your heartbeat increases when it's time to throw someone up against the wall. So how easy would it be for there to be implicit bias and you not even be aware of it? You know, you probably didn't stop and throw someone up against the wall who was in a nice suit, who looks like they were carrying their briefcase back from the law office. So, you know, that just leaves you open for these unintentional moments that put us in danger.
It's such a setup, because I think I'm doing a good thing and I'm oblivious to the outrage that's causing. And then when the public turns around and directs that anger towards me, it pulls out my defensiveness that says, how the heck do you not understand what I'm trying to do? I feels like you don't get me at all. I get more defensive, which makes it harder for me to empathize with you. You get more angry, which makes me more defensive, and we're done. We're just
then imagine
lost in
carrying that into your
cycle.
next shift, right?
That's
Exactly.
right.
And I think that catches the element of what Ryan's talking about, this impairment. Because what we want to do is not like this automatically just labeling, but we do all have to recognize in each of our jobs, we're therapists. We have to recognize things that have happened in our past that might impair us to be able to join with certain people. I mean, even in our job, if someone from a past reminds me of the stepfather who was spiritually or emotionally abusive, then am I going to then unload on that person when they hit that part of me and not even be aware of how it's coming across? And I think, and I know that's like a smaller example, but how much more, and I get it, that's the pressure that police, I think, feel, because for them, it's matters of life and death. It's a matter of them, do they get home to the family that they love? It's a matter of them protecting their partner that they love and that they care about, right? And so these things happen so fast. And I think one of the things you're so good at teaching, George, is about triggers. And I think the big thing I hope for cops is, and if they humbly let me speak into that place, because I know that's a sacred, place for them, is I just want them to help be aware and honest with themselves about those triggers. And just what Ryan was saying is like, because I think the impairment is when I don't recognize my triggers. We all have them. We all have certain biases and things that we've experienced, but it's when I'm not aware of them that takes me out of my professional role, to be able to recognize when a particular profile of a person, whether it's size, gender, or ethnicity, or even like Ryan said, I liked how he did that. Even, do you drive by the guy that just got out of his Mercedes in a suit, and do you throw him on a wall to check him for a gun? In most of if we're honest, it's like, of course not, we don't do that. He's a prominent person. He's a good citizen. But if he gets out of, an old car with some rims and he's got if he's got an athletic shirt on, then does he fit the profile? He gets thrown up against the building a little bit harder. I don't know. But we all have to find our heart to make sure we don't have those biases and they impact our job, I think.
And I just want to reiterate that because I think it's relevant right now. George is trying to do his job. He's trying to get guns off the street. He also, you got to throw him up against the wall pretty quickly, because what if he turns that gun on you?
That's right.
So you can't be soft and sweet all the time when you're in a dangerous situation, right? But you're not necessarily paying attention for what's the result of that going to be, because now your next shift, that's affected. Then the way they respond to police, that's affected. Next thing you know, they're calling you a pig, or mocking you. So then you're like, okay, I'll show you who's the boss, because you got to be in control. That's your job. But then the more you're in control, the more they're going to be defensive, and so now we have this vicious cycle which takes on a life of its own. And that's what I saw in the George Floyd video. I saw an impaired cop or a few impaired cops. I think this is what I saw. I saw impaired cops. I also saw, if you listen to the sound, appropriately, the people in the area are pushing back on the cop, but they're not saying, please, sir, like they're mad. And I get that. I want to make space for that response. They're calling him names. You're an effing pig. You're an effing. And the more they did that, the more he was just like, I'll show you. I'll show you. Right. And so this vicious cycle right there probably ends up taking this guy's life. My sense is if they had not got into that cycle, he might have had his knee on his back for 5 minutes and at least he would have lived. Mm-hmm. I'm not taking the responsibility off the officers in play, but the cycle is a factor as well.
Yeah. And isn't that the hard part, though? Because that's where the cops do bear the more responsibility, because they're the ones that say, I train to be in these moments every single day. My training should help me rise above that moment.
Yep.
But what is that training? That training is to rein in your feelings. And Ryan's 100% right. You can't show weakness. Right. So you have to project this air of confidence and in control, or, you're in trouble. So you get all this training to put a mask on and hide your feelings, and get no training to turn it back on. And again, what breaks my heart when you replay these scenes is, these police officers, they're only following the rules, that what they were taught to turn off their feelings. They don't understand the cost of what that actually means. They're willing to hide themselves, hide their feelings, to serve others, to love others. And over time, the effect of putting up walls to keep out the bad things also starts to keep out the good things, right? And they don't want to go home and share the bad things with their wives. They don't want to share. So they have nowhere to go with these kind of feelings. The only thing they know what to do is to go away, to take a break, right? Distance is their only friend, getting away from emotions, right? And before you know it, their whole life is about trying to outrun emotions. And then when we wonder why in these moments they miss emotions, well, hello, this is like predictable math equation. If you've trained somebody, if they've had thousands upon thousands of interactions where they've ran away from their emotions, well, hello, here we go. This is what they're going to do. That's why I think ethically we got to do a much better job of teaching these police officers to see the cost of what they're trying to do, to see that to keep out the bad, they're losing their own humanity in the process, that they deserve to have people see them in these places of struggle that usually nobody sees. They need to be the strong ones. They don't want to show these weak parts of themselves, but in hiding the weak parts of themselves, they start to lose themselves.
I love that, George, about when you talk about we've taught them to turn off these feelings, but that comes at a cost. And I think when you said that, it's like it comes at a cost professionally and personally. Personally, of course, in the fallout of their family, but such as, and I'm not even just sure this case, but probably in other cases, it can compromise them professionally, because I agree with what Ryan said. There is that part of you that you do have to hurry up. You do have to get them against the wall. But if I stay stuck in I'm jamming you against the wall, and then I'm so disconnected, is there any place where hopefully my body gets a chance, my brain gets a chance in the midst of it, and you can speak to this a little bit more, George, in the midst of it, to reassess the situation and to know if I have the option to de-escalate now. It's like he's on the wall. My life is no longer a threat. The citizens are safe, and my partners are safe. And even if people are shouting at me, I have still enough professional capacity to sort through that. My training's allowed me the ability to assess the situation. And I don't know, maybe I'm going too far with it, but you tell me.
No, this is so good. I think so important. This is the really good news about this conversation and this is what Ryan started off with. If you could identify a problem, you could address it, you could fix it, you could create the change. It takes the guesswork out of this, right? If you could identify part of this problem is turning off feelings, you could come up with programs to turn them on. That's the good news. We know how to do this. We know how to help people become more present and authentic and to listen to their signals. And maybe it won't happen in that moment when I'm throwing some up against the wall because my training's taken over. But how about when I go back? Is there any help to say, what did you just do?
Yeah, that's good.
What was it like for the other person? What do you think it was like for that kid? What if your son was one of those kids? Like, when are we ever having those conversations that help people really kind of develop a more flexibility?
That's right. I love that, George. I remember when I was a medic before, as far as learning how to do IV sticks and stitches, one of the ways we learned, I wanted to learn it. I'd have people practice on me. I wanted to know what it felt like to get an IV. I know that sounds crazy, but when I got ready to do an IV for the next person, I could walk them through the whole process, and I would adjust what I did because I knew what the care that I'd want in that moment.
It's great.
something really important, I think, George, that you said is when it comes to turning the emotions back on, what we're talking about is your metaphor of a dimmer switch. We're not trying to suggest that police need to walk around crying all the time or being this super sensitive people. They don't need to change the nature of who they are.
That's right.
All it takes is a very small amount of attunement. That's a word that we use.
Small
to where you catch us. All it takes is a tiny amount to make these massive events not happen. And let's be clear, these massive events and the public outrage put cops' lives in danger. All of them. And so all it takes is just a little bit of attunement to keep these things from happening. What makes these dangerous, though, I have a lot of friends and family who are police officers. If you say, hey, are you impaired or are you good? The answer is going to be, I'm fine. I'm just doing my job. I'm doing my job. And that's what makes it a little bit dangerous is, do you know if your heart is in a place where you don't need to be in those situations, how would you know? To me, one of the main, I have 3 or 4 ideas that may or may not be helpful, is police groups, sheriff offices, whoever the situation is, has to have some mechanism to really evaluate where the slate is, if you will. Am I operating from a clean slate where I can handle every situation as its own, or am I carrying forward from previous situations? Am I already upregulated at a 5 out of 10 before I ever get in my squad car? Or am I able to restart? We have to put that in play, or
Which, Ryan,
I don't know if this can go forward.
It's not so different than what we're doing with couples all the time, right? You want to take a check-in and just notice the distance, notice where you're at. Your body's going to communicate. It's going to let you know where you're at. If you never check in, you can never get that information. If you're feeling tired and weighted down and you're not smiling and you're kind of feeling frustrated and angry, that's a sign, right? It's a sign of the cumulative effect of just what's happening. Yep. I love that idea of finding ways to check in emotionally. Take the temperature. Your temperature is going to tell you where you're at, your emotional temperature.
That's right.
Now we got all these stakes for COVID-19, right? Taking your real physical temperature.
Yeah.
So that was one, Ryan. You got 3 more?
Yeah, just a couple, and I don't want to go into the whole thing here, but I really think, first of all, let us say we understand that the vast majority of interactions with police officers go well.
That's right.
We know that the majority of law enforcement officers are not horrible people. They're not racist. We know that. We didn't say that, but I want to say it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
And,
can I just again, just to jump in to highlight that though, just to appreciate most of the interactions with cops and public, the cop is dealing with something negative, right? They're giving you a ticket. They're coming to a crime scene. Most people aren't super happy to see a police officer, right? So what's that like for the police officer to be around that kind of negative energy all the time, that people are not really happy to see you, that they're scared to see you, that they want to get away from you? That takes its toll on us, right? And you want to block it out and not let it impact you, but some of it seeps in. Right. And there has to be a way of kind of voicing that and getting help in those places where, you are taking on weight, you're taking on negativity. It starts to change who you are. I was always amazed as a new cop seeing what like a cop of 20 years looked like. They often look like they were 40 years on the service because they're just the toll that this took on you being around this all day. And they're willing to do it because they love and they're willing to sacrifice. And I really hope that people listening recognize the costs, and we could help you pay less of a price for that training that you're getting.
And then, like what Ryan is saying, a vast majority go well. But then it's like it reminds me of kind of like an airline pilot. A vast majority of their flights could go well, but one bad flight, man, what an impact. So I can't even imagine what it's like to have to carry that kind of margin for that small margin for error sometimes that they carry. That's why it matters so much. Like the vast majority go well, but we do have to also be so concerned about when it's like Ryan's saying, if you're impaired and you're getting close to making that margin of error and can't handle it, that's scary, right?
Yeah. We also do a much better job of screening pilots, right? Because you just can't have a bad pilot who's just going to crash planes every once in a while, right? Yep. So how do we do that level of assessment that's saying it's really not okay to be a cop who's not on top of his game to get out into the community. That's too heavy of a responsibility to carry. We need to do a much better job of assessing that.
And that goes into finances at that point. You know, if we got to have enough cops and we can't afford to pay them more and we can't afford to have them stay off their shifts, I get that. And yet I think we're getting to a place where we can't afford not to. But anyway, back to my point, I just want to reiterate, I know most police officers, law enforcement officers are good people. I know I don't want to live in a place that doesn't have them. And I appreciate that you guys, I appreciate that you guys take care of stuff I don't want to. So we appreciate you.
Absolutely.
I want to contradict myself just a little. I know personally, I've had hundreds of interactions with police officers and the majority of them go well. But I will say I've had 20-25% that did not go well in a strange way. And I tell my friends, my family members, I'm like, I sometimes don't have great interactions with cops. And they're all like, oh yeah, we feel so sorry for you. My wife said, oh yeah, you're such a victim here. Cops are mean until they're around me, and it happens again. And I've walked in multiple situations where I was saying or doing nothing, and a police officer, a law enforcement officer will pick me out of the crowd and come do something intimidating to me. My wife saw it last summer and she was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that you were doing nothing. Like, you've said this to me before, but I didn't realize that it was really true. So why am I telling that story? I don't know for sure what's causing it. I've never sat down with the cop afterwards and had a beer and said, hey, what was up with that? But my only guess is I'm 6'6" and about 265 pounds, depending on how close it is to Thanksgiving. I'm a big guy. And I've heard thousands of times the comment, man, you're intimidating. So my only guess is to say, when I walk in the room, I'm the biggest guy in the room usually. And for whatever reason, I trigger some kind of power response, maybe some kind of fear response, maybe some kind of, I got to make sure that he knows that I'm in charge here. And I really respect that, actually, because I can see why you'd want to do that. I can see why someone that represents power could represent your job being to suppress that power to make sure there's safety. I think it happens on an unconscious level. What it also does, though, is it opens up the police officer to say, well, what does represent power to you? And does people's skin color represent power? Does people who are dressed a certain way or tattoos or whatever you might think of, does that represent that? So that opens that up for the implicit bias. So to me, that's the hardest part of this, just like George is saying, is you can't be weak. You can't let a situation get out of control. The best way to handle something out of control is to nip it in the bud. Like Barney Fife used to say, right? He was a cop. You got to go get it early, because if you let 6 and 7 things happen, now you got 10 people upset and you can't handle that. So I think I see what happens, and yet that's an area that's got to be extremely careful and cautious with. Does that make sense at all?
Totally, man.
It does, and we need to dispel some of these myths that, if you lose that ability to turn off your feelings, that you're going to be more at risk. And the research is pretty clear that the best leaders can be flexible, right? They do know how to turn it off when they got to take care of business, and then they know how to turn their feelings back on when it's safe and the people around them are going to be responsive. They have success with their feelings. The biggest problem here with most cops is they don't have success with their feelings. Every time feelings come up, they're negative, they're bad, and they want to stay away from them. If you want cops to do more emotions, they got to have success with those feelings. Mm-hmm. And the best way to have success is your own feelings are seen and responded to. If you're feeling overwhelmed and beaten down, and somebody comes up alongside you and says, hey, I'm sorry, this sucks, and I don't want you to be alone, and they you can share that weight. Our nervous systems are designed, and this is the irony here. Police officers, military, firefighters know this at certain level. They know the best way to handle fear is with somebody else. I didn't run into a burning building by myself. Having somebody else made all the difference. And yet what's happened to so many police officers is their inner fears are never shared, right? And when your inner fears are never shared, you are set up to kind of fail with emotions. And then you're blamed because you don't want to do emotions, right? Where that's what they were trained to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to unpack that specifically. When you said you're set up to kind of fail, specifically what we mean is when you have that much compression of your emotions, and emotions are just a bodily function like any other. So people say that they don't share emotions. That's like saying you don't urinate. And I'm like, what? That's a bodily function. You got to take care of what your body wants to do. So if you suppress that and suppress it and constrict it and constrict, let's be specific. You enter a situation that's a 6 out of 10 in danger, but because you entered already impaired, constricted, your body sends you a signal that it's an 8. And you respond at that 8 or a 9, and next thing you know, we got trouble.
Yeah.
And I don't think that happens most of the time. But the problem is it only has to happen a few times to cause things like this. And so that's the piece that's such a burden for me. I want to say this, the bad apple theory. Most cops are really good. There's a few bad apples. I definitely believe that most cops are good. But there's more to it than that. And that's not a good enough theory. We got to look at our process. We got to look at, getting people back to that dimmer switch idea of being fully human. The ability to do even just a little bit of an emotional attunement, the ability to really, really assess each other and yourself of when you're not at a place to go into dangerous situations. And again, I know that has financial implications, but it's too dangerous to not invest in it.
Yeah, we
I want
want
to
to
catch
learn.
Ryan. I want to make sure we follow up on that because I don't know if these supervisors or first responders that hear you say that. What do you mean about small amounts of emotional attunement? How could you make that more explicit for them?
Yeah, I mean, without going into a whole thing, I was a college athlete. I was also taught to get rid of my emotions. If I got hurt, my job was to play injured. And if you could do it, you win. When you do that long enough, you learn to shut that off. So, I mean, in my own life, I have been and continue to be in a process of learning to listen to my body again. You don't have to be great at it if you can just capture a little bit. If you can just enough to notice, man, I'm irritable today. Man, my wife, burned the toast, and I'm having a really strong response. Pay attention to that. Instead of acting like it wasn't there. I mean, just little stuff like that along the way allows you to get in a scene and to notice your own responses and to try to dial that back, and or what George is saying, give someone a call the captain or whatever it is and say, hey, I'm okay, but I'm talking through this. That takes a lot of humility. That takes a culture within that team that says this is part of what we do.
That's right.
And again, that's the part that's so hard because we know that culture is one of power a lot of times, but our world's changing. And what was okay 40 years ago is no longer okay, and in fact, putting people's lives in danger.
Yeah. And I want to highlight what you said, Ryan, about this. What my biggest concern and why I'm glad you two are willing to put aside some time for this is I don't want us to get stuck in this negative cycle. And if I put it in a cycle, and maybe it's not the best one, but it's this us against them mentality. Either way it goes, right? And so right now, when moments like this happen, I know that already, well, at least what I predict is, wow, every interaction now between the police and public is going to be ramped up. And that's just not a good set. That's just not a good formula. So if I already come in as a black male and I'm ramped up with the cop, and so he's already trying to do his job, but he's also seeing all the videos. He's watching the protests. He's hearing all the, whatever slurs. So he or she is amped up already. So we've got two amped up people here for very good reasons. We're both amped up because now we're both afraid of our lives. I've got a bias against this cop already. The cop might already have a bias against me. And then which one of us is going to be emotionally attuned enough to then reach to modulate how we interact in that moment. And then it just keeps feeding. And we don't come into these moments in society enjoying really well with either side. That's the key. I really think that the part where it sucks in this is I believe, and this is me putting myself out vulnerably, I don't think society does a good job of joining with the minority community in this. They get dismissed and invalidated and told that they're completely wrong. And then people throw all of the stats on them that came from whatever place. And that's great. But even if you throw a stat at me, that does not make my fear go away. That does not make the historical context of it go away. But not only for the minority community, because then you come in And the society doesn't do well at coming with the cops, because then with the cops, it's you all are a part of this. You all did this. Everyone who wears the badge is a bad, horrible person. And at any moment, if you it's like almost like you're looking for trouble. When you get in your cop car, you're looking for black people to take them out. Right. And then the cop is just like, I don't get paid that much already. I'm trying to work extra shifts so I can make ends for my family, and I could die. It's like people want to take my life. And then it's valid, because when moments like this happen, people do end up killing cops. They seek them out and snipe them out. So society doesn't do well with joining with one of these, and they leave them both alone in that place that they suck, while we go and have like political arguments and things of that. And we don't go join the people that are hurting. So that's the big part for me. It's holding space for the minority community, and that your fears make sense around this and your anger makes sense around this.
Yeah.
But also holding space for the police. You feeling blamed and a little fed up and you feeling on edge. It makes complete sense. How could you not feel that way? How could either community not feel that? And then no one comes along to help you. So then you all feel, the police can feel on their own with it. So they've got to form the blue wall to take care of themselves. And then if, like George is saying, none of them have learned to deal with their emotions. So behind the blue wall, no one can do these small amounts of assessment. No one can do these small amounts of attunement with the real and valid fear, because it'd be weakness. That's just, so they're set up for failure. And then for the minority, no one comes and meets you in your anger, and they just tell you you're making it all up in your head. And so no one comes and helps you. So that just leaves you alone. You have to form your own wall to protect yourself and to look out for yourself. And so we just keep the cycle just keeps going.
Yep. I love the image of the cops kneeling. That's exactly what we're talking about, right? You're just taking a moment to touch our common humanity that says, how could I not respect the pain of the people I'm serving? Right? And then after you stand up from the kneeling, you go back to taking care of business. Somebody throws a rock at you, you got to do what you got to do, turn off your feelings. Great, right? We are better if we can do both, right? We've just overdeveloped one side of this. And really, this is about cops. If you're listening to us, this isn't saying you're wrong or something bad. You're just doing what you were trained to do, right? We can train you to be more flexible. And that is the most hopeful image. I'm going to take that out. This is the first time I've seen cops across this nation not just saying all or nothing. I have to protect, the blue wall. They recognize I can do both. I can protect the blue wall, and I can kneel down with the people. And we have more from that.
George, that's the line. Catch that. We can do better if we can do both. We can do better if we can do both. We can do. I just want to keep reiterating. That's the new. That should be the new social media hashtag for everybody in life. We can do better if we get both. We're in a dangerous place when any of us become rigid and we become locked into one way, because then we try and use that one way all the time, and it just can't work. It may work sometimes, but then it's like Ryan was saying. Sometimes it could lead to disastrous results, even if that probably is maybe 0.005% of the time.
Yeah. And you're not betraying the blue wall by kneeling. That's more courageous to really show the service that is your call, right? Your call is to serve the community. And there's no more beautiful way of doing that than to kneel down and meet them in their pain. That is doing emotion really well. And 2 minutes later, you can go back to turning it off.
I love it.
And that's the cry out to leadership, because the likelihood of one cop or one deputy in a unit changing this against a culture that doesn't allow this it's not going to happen. Man. It's got to start from the top. It's got to be, hey, new rules of how we're going to do this. And I think even the external internal confusion, I support the protest for the most part. I support the need to say that change is needed. I think a lot of cops do too. Mm-hmm. But just telling cops to not be racist, I don't think it accomplishes very much. What we're asking here is to really take a look at the internal process within our departments and within each officer to say, hey, where am I? I think even these quote unquote bad apples probably don't wake up in the morning and think, hey, I'm going to go kill some black people today. I don't think even that. I don't think that's their intention, even the worst of. But I do think what it takes to be able to kneel down and also go do what you got to do has to be a culture change within each department.
That's beautiful. You guys, I think this is landing right where I was hoping for. And that's the part I think, even as we're all trained professionals in what we do, we've all risen the ranks of our profession. And even for us in this moment, we had to really, before we got on here, was like, what are we trying to get done? What are we trying to do? All know our heart, but I think it got clearer for me. And I think we captured the essence of what the difficulty for the cops. And I liked when George said, every moment they're going into usually isn't going to be good. It's not often the cop gets hey, there's a person on the corner crying and they need a hug. That's just not the cop. That's not the call the cops get, right? They're going into hard situations day in and day out, and that can become impairment for different reasons. We do know that society also can impair a cop. And so we want to talk about what are those ways, where were you raised, what were your experiences with the different people, particularly like if they're going to police a certain area. Will help me understand what's your relationship with those people that you're going to be policing, and what things that you need to recognize in yourself that might impact you and your ability to police them as a professional, as we've trained you to do. But also this part where George saying is like, we want to be able to empower our police officers to be the highest caliber people who can do both, who can knows when to turn it off, because that's the part of being professional. I know when I've got to turn it off and get it done, but I also recognize I can re-access that part of me to make sure I'm doing my job effectively. Or even after the situation, we're so professional, we can go back and we can hot wash it and we can go through it. So that way, when I go into the next interaction, I can go in, still get the job done. And I've got a clean slate as well, too, as Ryan was saying. But even as we join with the police, we also recognize, and I think that's what you're right, George, the hopeful piece is, I think I've heard so many, I know here in Fayetteville, I can speak to, I can see the police chief doing a really great job of hearing the community and seeing and validating the frustration for minorities in this particular area around this, and how the anger and that frustration and the kneeling and saying, we can't continue this cycle, because if we continue in the same cycle, it's dangerous for all of us. It's dangerous for the officers I lead, and it's dangerous for the minority community as well. And yeah, I just love it. I think this really is landing in a good place.
I just want to say I want to make one quick clarification, because I've talked about officers being impaired like 6 times. So just for the record, I am saying I do think race can be an issue. I think officer impairment is a stronger issue.
Yeah.
But I also want to say if a law enforcement officer is impaired, he or she probably has really good reasons they're impaired.
There you go.
They've probably suffered things that are extraordinary. I have no doubt that they have a right to be impaired. What we don't have, what can no longer happen, is people who are impaired get put into situations where it becomes dangerous. And that's the piece that we all want to come alongside people and help them have different results.
Yeah. And when you were saying impairment, go ahead, George.
Yeah, my last message here would be, to police officers, you cannot effectively serve your community if you're chronically turning off your emotions, right? Your community needs your emotions. It's the best part of who you are. To connect with people, you need to tap into that. You cannot serve your community if you're turning that off. And too many police officers have been trained to do that. So if you find yourself in that position, it's not your fault, and you need help. But the good news here is you can learn to do that, and you will enjoy your job better, and you'll have better relationships by learning how to do that.
Well, in honor of, in honor there, I think, George, it's appropriate you have that last word there. Thank you too, once again, for sharing your time. And I want to make sure I say this to all who hear this, and it might land on different people different ways. And that's okay, because we aren't perfect. We're not saying that. But what I hope whoever hears this, that what you capture is, we're just 3 guys who see it, and we're hurting for society. We've all talked to each other. We've all expressed all the range of emotion, from sadness to disgust. And we just said, we want to be a part of the solution the best way we possibly can for everybody. Not just because I think society forces us, like we have to choose a side. Well, if you choose one side, then nobody wins. Nobody really wins there. And so for the police officers, we're here with you. For the minority community, whomever, we're just here for society, period. And so we're just trying to help give you some more language and some more words. And we're trying to expand the conversation a little bit more, because we're just trying to break this cycle, because it just can't continue on. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
All right. And so just a little addendum. I know we closed it out, but we want to come in and make sure we make this point explicitly clear. even as we talk about impairment, that's not impairment like as though race can't be a part of it. When we're saying impairment, what we're saying is that different factors go into impairment, such as even what George is saying, this inability to turn our emotions back on. There's an impairment of breakdown of even maybe relationships outside of what you do, to where you don't, it blocks your ability in. But also we do want to make space for that. What is going, we're asking the question, does race come into play as a part of impairment, or ethnic bias is coming into a part of impairment? And what would you say to that, Ryan?
Yeah, for sure it does. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I think when I'm trying to say impairment, what I'm trying to say is when someone's in a healthy space, when they're feeling secure, when they have this ability to turn off and on, even just some, they probably wouldn't be doing these things. Right. So that's what I'm referring to is they're in a state where they're doing things that they would not normally do, or is inconsistent with their typical values. And without a doubt, racial bias can be a part of impairment.
Thank y'all so much. We just want to make sure we make that clear. And the reason we want to make it clear is even for, because as supervisors, as you assess, we want you to be able to expand the idea of impairment. And I don't want to just lock you into just racism as though someone who just goes around saying they hate a particular racial group. But could a cop been exposed to so many things and stereotypes in society, or maybe even in their own policing and trying to do their job well, and that could impair their ability in this particular area? And we just want to recognize it to help them, not to punish. Because I know sometimes assessment for military and cops, you're assessing me so you can punish me. That's not what we're going for, is to help you.